Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next edition of the Cybiant webinar series. In this webinar today, I'm going to make you familiar about the term service intelligence, which is something that has been growing very rapidly in the last couple of years. Before we get started with this webinar, let me introduce a couple of the key aspects that we're going to be doing throughout this webinar. First of all, we need to note that this webinar is being recorded. So if for whatever reason your connection breaks or you would like to rewatch any section of any of the materials that we are presenting, we will post a recording online after this session and you will receive a link towards the video. Additionally, if you would like to ask any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A box, which is part of the Zoom platform. Towards the end of this webinar, I will moderate all of the different questions that have come in, but you're not allowed to interrupt or turn on your microphone for the duration of the webinar. Everybody has been muted by default. Thirdly, we are always very keen to learn about your feedback. Actually, this whole webinar was composed because people from our previous webinar requested more information about service intelligence. So I really would like to ask you to take a few minutes to fill in the survey after this session has ended. Good, now that we've covered some of the logistics, let's get started with our main topic. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg and I'm the Managing Director of Cybiant. Besides working at this company, I'm also love to write. So I've written a couple of books, most notably in the service automation and big data domains. And I will be presenting some of those insights from the books in this upcoming session. I'm based out of Kuala Lumpur, so that is also where I will be presenting today's session from. Besides this, I would love teaching. So I present a lot of conferences and universities across the world and do a lot of lectures like the one I'm sharing with you today. If you would like to get in touch with me during or after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to me directly. On the left-hand side of this slide, you will see my contact details and how to get in touch with me directly. In this webinar, I've composed the following program. What I will do today is start with an introduction of service intelligence, and I will start explaining what the concept is all about. We will start our discussion with looking at some of the key challenges that most organizations are facing in the ITSM industry today. And these challenges have been further enlarged by the developments that are happening around the world in this very challenging year. After we've established that, we will move forward with our discussion about artificial intelligence. We will look at the fundamental concepts of AI, where it comes from, and what are some of its fundamental techniques. Because I always believe that if you don't truly know what are the key elements of a particular technique, it's going to be very, very difficult to make that work in practice. So what we will do is we'll cover some of the fundamental techniques and theories beyond artificial intelligence, and then we will move on with discussing how they can be applied within the ITSM industry. So this is really where we are bringing the intelligence into service management. The last part of this webinar will cover how you can get started. So we will kind of discuss the journey towards a service intelligent organization. We'll discuss the different steps to go through from service management to service automation, and finally towards service intelligence. Towards the end of the webinar, I will moderate the questions that have been coming in. So if you have any questions during any part, or you would like me to explain more about a particular topic, please feel free to put in all your questions into the chat box and I will moderate them towards the end. Good, so that's our agenda for today. Let's get started with some of the main topics. Before we get started, I would like to raise a quick poll. We are with a lot of delegates on the call today, so I kind of want to ask you the question, did you ever encounter the term service intelligence before in your work or as part of any project that you've worked on? Please give me a moment to launch the poll. And that should be visible right now. I'm going to give you 20 to 30 seconds to vote before I will display all of the results. Good, I see people are very actively voting, so thank you so much for that. Good, I'm going to give you another 10 seconds. Good, thank you so much. And I'm going to close the poll right now and showcase some of the results back to the group. So here's the results of the audience in this call today. The majority of people, 62%, never heard about service intelligence before. So this is really a new topic, and I hope that after this webinar, I've at least accomplished the fact that you now know what service intelligence is all about. 33% has heard about the phrase, but has not seen it about in practice. So hopefully after today's session, you will see with some of the examples I'm going to be providing how it can be implemented in real organizations. And there's one person on the call who's actively using service intelligence. So for them, it might be a little bit of a recap. Thank you so much for participating in this poll and sharing your opinion and feedback. I hope this is kind of useful to kind of start where we are today. Good, let's keep continuing. Good, let's first start with looking at the bigger picture. Why is service intelligence becoming a more and more pressing topic, and why are so many organizations interested in it? The reason, or the way that I always like to explain that, is by kind of looking at the urgency. And there's no better way to express the urgency than looking at a number of the pressures that any enterprise IT shop today is facing. If you are working in any IT organization today, you will see that there's a lot of new things that are putting pressure on the IT departments. New technologies, customer expectations, the ability to do more with less resources, a growing amount of competition, growing importance of technology, and increasing rules and regulations. So these are some of the examples. And of course, this is not a comprehensive list. You can name a whole other list of other pressures that are coming towards IT organizations. But the key message is that any IT organization, maybe more than other departments, faces a lot of pressures from a variety of different sources. And it's up to an IT department to deal with that efficiently and effectively. What we can also establish, if we look at the things that an IT department needs to do, is that the number of key priorities of any enterprise IT organization have largely been unaltered over the last couple of years. There's still a majority of focus on 4 main pillars. First of all, you need to make sure that IT supports business by increasing revenue and provided at lower costs. Throughout the years, IT has needed to start delivering more functionality, better processes with less resources. And that is because of the competition, it's because of the IT maturity that is growing, and because all of the newer technologies make this all possible. The second key priority is to keep improving customer satisfaction, and that has especially become important in this last year. Many companies today are now faced with the situation that IT has become the core of their business because they cannot interact with their customers in a face-to-face way. So the pressure on IT to improve customer satisfaction has been tremendous. A third element, of course, is that IT needs to facilitate the internal collaboration between the different parts of the same organization, and it needs to increase employee engagement. Especially nowadays, when almost everybody's working from home, IT is crucial to deliver business results. And the last major element and key priority that IT is facing is to reduce compliance risk and make sure that you're following rules and regulations. And there's no better way than for IT systems to track and monitor that and to set up the appropriate governance processes. So in the previous slide, we covered some of the key pressures that are facing every IT organization today. Whereas at this slide, we looked at some of the key IT priorities. So how do you deal with that from a delivery point of view? Well, that answer is something that we're going to look at into more detail. But before we get into that, let us first start with revisiting a definition of what is service management. Because in order to deliver those results that we've seen on the previous slides, what almost every organization does on a day-to-day basis is deliver services. Yes, IT is focused on delivering products and technology, but the majority of work is spent as packaging and providing it as services towards different parts of the same organization or to external customers in its overall view. So on this next slide, you will see a definition of service management that is probably one of the best known service management definitions in the world, coming out of the ITIL framework. Here it says that service management is a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value to customers in the form of services. And I always really like the way that this is graphically displayed on the slides. You have these variety of different services, some of which are more important than others, but the key objective of these services is to provide value towards your customers. And whether those customers are your colleagues or somebody who's outside of your organization and that actually pays for your services, that doesn't really matter. The key job of any IT department is to make sure that those services are delivering value towards customers. So that's the basic premise of service management. So if we know that, the next question then of course becomes, well, how do we do that in practice? And there is also a lot of guidance available around that. In its essence, we say that any company that provides IT services does so to deliver value. So ITSM is really there as a structure and a way in which any organization can provide long-term value towards an enterprise. But I've added a particular quick sentence, and that is only if it's done right. Because in most organizations nowadays, service delivery needs to become increasingly more competitive. Most users today, and with users, I mean people who are actually consuming IT services, are known that and have the expectations that services can always be delivered instantly, that they're always accessible, no matter which kind of device you're using, and that services are available 24/7. So this is putting in an additional pressure onto the IT department because we are used to consuming IT services in our private lives as well. Using our smartphones, using applications, we now are accustomed that we can access IT services at any moment of the day, regardless of the situation that we're in. So that has kind of caused a shift. Instead of just delivering valuable services towards our customers that customers come to appreciate, we now also need to think about the service experience. So what we've really seen is this shift where the service experience is becoming more and more important. So the key question then is, how do we organize that? How do we put the processes and the structure in place to really make sure that we can deliver this valuable services and therefore constitute a good service experience? And the next slide here shows you how this is done from an organization point of view. And this is the way that IT best practices and IT service management in the ITIL framework look at the way that services need to be delivered. At the top of the slide, you see that services are delivered, and that's the end goal. This is the element that customers see, the element that people are looking forward to and that they can actually consume. Customers are using their service offering in order to get access to goods, access to resources, and to be provided with different service actions. So think about that for a moment in your own work environment. If you are consuming a service, you typically look at a particular catalog, which is nothing else than the service offerings. So if you're consuming a service, let's say a CRM service or a financial service, you need to have access to particular software, which is access to resources. You might need to access that from a smartphone or from a tablet, which is a particular product or good that you would need to access. And sometimes you might require assistance. You need help. You need to make sure that if you have a question that you will be helped. So there is a service component added to that. And this is what we refer to as service actions. So together, those three components are culminating in what is known as a service catalog. And today, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go exactly into the details of how service catalogs are structured, but you just kind of need to trust me that this is how we will combine services towards the market. So this is a very famous picture from the ITIL framework. And if you've ever been on any ITSM course, this might look familiar. So the next question then, of course, is how do we combine those two concepts together? And where does service intelligence fit in? So basically what I've done on this next slide is that I've kind of combined both pictures together. And because of visibility, I've kind of shifted or rotated the picture on the left by 90 degrees, because that is really what the customer sees. So on a very high level basis, you see the following flow. In an IT organization, we have access to a number of resources and products. So those resources and products are the people that work in an organization, but they could also be more physical components like computers, software licenses, network components, and all of these products and resources are combined together in order to provide a service offering. For instance, network services, application services, mobile services, or even just a simple application that people can use. From a customer point of view, this is always what a service will be. And any service provider provides one or more of those services towards their customer base. And that's what we see in the middle of this slide. Some of these services might be more popular, which is why I've depicted them with a larger dot, or some of those services might be used by just a segment or just very targeted audience, which is why I've depicted them with a smaller dot. So it's a combination of these services that will start to deliver value towards customers. So I always think that it's good to kind of start understanding this basic concept of how any IT service provider delivers value towards customers. So now getting back towards the main point, where does artificial intelligence comes in? How can we organize this in a more efficient and effective way? Well, if we look at that, basically every action that we take is part of a value chain. In the end, we would like to offer value towards our customers. And with every step along the way, we're going to add and increase value towards that value chain. So in the end, every step that we're taking, every new service that we're producing, every support action that we're doing delivers value towards customers in the end. So the next question, of course, is how can we make sure that we do this in a smarter way? How do we make sure that we cannot just provide those services, that we can know which services customers need? Or for instance, if there are dependencies between different services that might pose a risk to service delivery. So for that reason, you see the green box, which is around the different services, resources, and products. And this is going to be the focus point and the scope of what service intelligence is all about. In service intelligence, we are going to look to optimize our resources, products, service offerings, and services towards customers itself. And we're going to do this with smart forms of technology, smarter forms of technology that have not been available before, and that more and more organizations now slowly start to adapt. So if we summarize the previous slide a little bit further in words, we see that service intelligence applies new techniques and new techniques and technologies towards the more traditional domain of IT service management. And particularly, these techniques are known as machine learning techniques and artificial intelligence techniques. And I will explain what those particular techniques are in some of the upcoming slides. But for now, I just want you to kind of see the bigger picture. See that basically the core domain of service management remains unaltered. It has been this way, and the way that's been organized since the early 1980s. So service management in itself is nothing new. The only thing that's new is that there is now new technologies and new techniques available, which can make sure that we can do service management in a smarter, more crucial, and more intelligent way. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on this. This also means that within service management, we now have more access to data than ever before, because we exactly know what our customers are doing within our systems. And this is exactly what we're going to leverage within service intelligence. Are we able to use smart technology in order to deliver a bit better service experience? Because as we've seen in the previous slides, this in the end is what it's all about. So how do we then define service intelligence? Well, actually, it's relatively simple. We're combining the existing domain of service management. And I think many of you who have been in our customer base have been to an IT service management course with us previously before. But what we're doing is combining this more ancient, more old domain of service management, which has been around for more than 4 or 5 decades. And we're combining this domain with the more newer field of artificial intelligence. And this is basically where the name comes from. It's a combination of the domain of service management with the new technologies from artificial intelligence. So you've seen that I played around a little bit with the colors in order to see where the name service intelligence comes from. So it's just a combination of these two knowledge domains. And that also brings me to the next point. In order to understand what service intelligence is really all about, there's basically two knowledge domains that you need to know about. You need to know about the world of service management, which I think most of you on the call will already know quite a lot about, but you will need to combine this with the knowledge domain of artificial intelligence. And from my experience, this is a domain that not a lot of people are still familiar with, because it's relatively new. Not a lot of organizations have actually started with our AI projects, and it's really crucial to get a bit of a fundamental understanding of what AI is all about. So this is, of course, it's no surprise that in the next couple of slides, I will be introducing some of the most fundamental aspects of artificial intelligence, and will teach you a little bit about how this can be incorporated into the domain of ITSM. So what is AI exactly? A lot of organizations are now claiming to have AI solutions. AI is a hot topic. You cannot look at any technology magazine nowadays without looking and seeing advertisements for AI or intelligent systems. But before we consider whether a system is truly intelligent and whether these claims are all true, let me provide you with an introduction of where artificial intelligence comes from, what it is, and where it has originated. Because I always think it's really good to kind of understand where things come from before you apply them into a more detailed practice. So on the slide in front of you, you see one of my favorite pictures that I'm always using when I'm explaining artificial intelligence, because this was really a crucial moment in history. On the slide in front of you, you see the world champion in the game of chess, the Russian Garry Kasparov. For over a decade, this was the world champion in the world in the game of chess. So the reason why I've chosen this example is because it's really interesting. On the first part, chess is a game that has been invented by people. It is not around in nature. No other species in the world plays it. So it's really a game that is based on memory and it's based on intelligence, and it has been invented by humankind itself. So in 1997, IBM built a specific computer which they called Deep Blue. And this computer was able to beat the world champion at that time in the game of chess. And this is really a pivotal moment for artificial intelligence, because if you think about that a little bit more deeply, you see that a computer was now able to beat the best player in the world at a game that we've invented ourselves. And if there's one thing true about chess, is that you will need to have intelligence in order to play it. So this is really considered one of the pivotal moments where computers started to outperform or rule people at their own game. So it's really, I would say, the moments that AI all started. And the second reason that I'm showing this is that it's only been since 1997, meaning that professional artificial intelligence was at that moment at the highest levels by the best computer scientists who were working at IBM at the time. But that was only 20 years ago. So the whole domain of artificial intelligence is completely new. Most people who were in school at the time that and are now in professional organizations did not learn about artificial intelligence at all. So it's a knowledge domain that will need to grow very steadily in the next couple of years. So that's the moment that AI started to become professionalized and when a lot of organizations also started to look into it. However, the origins of AI date back already from a larger period of time. It all started with Alan Turing, and that's a name that you're probably familiar with. Alan Turing wrote the very famous words, "Artificial intelligence is the art of creating machines that perform functions that require intelligence when performed by people." This is a really important quote because it will start to draw upon which techniques and technologies do we need in order to mimic that intelligence. So how do we mimic the human decision-making? So Alan Turing invented this very famous test, and this is a test that is very much used today. And that is, if a person cannot determine by itself whether they are talking to a computer or to another person, we kind of consider that system to be intelligent. And there's now a lot of these experiments available from phone calls or web applications in which people don't have the ability anymore to separate whether they are talking to an actual human being or whether they are talking to a computer. And this all dates back towards the Turing test. So why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting to look at this from a technology point of view. Because from a technology point of view, we can ask ourselves the question, well, if we know that we would like to pass the Turing test, what kind of techniques, what kind of technology would we require in order to pass the Turing test? In other words, what techniques do we require in order to have a truly intelligent system? And this is showcased in the next slide. So this is based on years of research into the artificial intelligence domain. So unfortunately today, in the short time that we have for the webinar, I don't have the time to go into all of these aspects in detail, but you just have to trust me that these are the key knowledge domains that would be required in order to have an artificial intelligence system. So in each of those individual fields, you could get multiple PhDs, so they're highly complex. The reason that I'm showing you these is that it's good to have a bit of a fundamental understanding when we're going to get into more practical examples about service intelligence. What is driving these technologies? What is the research? What is the technology that is powering these artificially intelligent systems? So on a very high level, we need to have 4 technological capabilities. First of all, we need to have the ability to translate human speech into something a computer can understand and something that a computer can get back towards people. So that's the whole domain of natural language processing, which is frequently abbreviated to NLP. This is how can we interface between a computer and things that people can understand. Because the first thing that we would need to do is, in order to not determine that we're talking to a computer, is that the computer needs to talk in the way that people do. So that's a very simplified version of a domain that's in essence, of course, truly complex. The second part that we would need in order to mimic intelligence is knowledge representation. Just as in our brains, we need to have the ability to store information quickly and to retrieve that quickly. So if I ask you the question, what did you have for breakfast this morning? Somewhere in your brain, you're going to make immediately a representation, and you're going to be able to collect that knowledge from a particular part in your brain. So this is where we store memories. This is where we store information. And the same analogy we can make for storing information in a particular computer. Because if I were to ask you the question, what did you have for breakfast today, but 2 weeks ago, then you will already find that a harder question, because that memory has either faded away or it's stored at a different location in a different part of your memory. So from a computer point of view, we need to have the ability to store and retrieve information within split seconds. And you can imagine that if you look at AI systems like self-driving cars, that this is really crucial. If we are working on self-driving cars, which is one of the famous AI solutions, of course, is we need to have the ability to make these kinds of decisions and to retrieve information within these split seconds, because literally lives can depend on it. The third major part is that we require automated reasoning. And with automated reasoning, we mean the ability of the computer to start thinking like people would. So to come towards certain conclusions, to trade off certain elements. And automated reasoning is quite more complex than simple if-else statements. And this is also the reason why a lot of the chatbots or systems which are nowadays claimed to be intelligent are not intelligent at all. They just follow a script or some simple if-else statements, but they don't execute automated reasoning. So for that reason, you cannot really say that these systems are truly intelligent. And then the last domain, and this is the domain that we're going to focus on a little bit more because it's easier and the research is further, especially in an enterprise context, is machine learning. So machine learning is basically the ability to start making better decisions over time by looking at previous situations. So a computer in that sense adapts and learns from previous mistakes so that it can make a better decision towards the future. So when we're talking about service intelligence, we typically talk about embedding the elements of these 4 techniques within modern service management organizations. And this is what makes it really interesting. What I also would like to stress is that all of these 4 domains are technical, they're complex, and they're in full front development mode. So we don't have this all figured out yet. We don't have completely figured out AI at this particular moment. But what we can already do in an enterprise context, even without having all of the PhDs, is apply some of these elements towards service management systems. And this is exactly what we're going to focus on within the rest of the course. So what I'm going to scope down artificial intelligence to is towards more of machine learning. And machine learning is this subset of artificial intelligence, but it is really useful because we can actually apply it to our modern ITSM technologies and our modern ITSM systems. So let's see how we can do that. On this next slide, I showcase 4 main techniques that are very frequently used within the domain of machine learning and therefore within the domain of artificial intelligence. And it's always really good to kind of understand what these 4 techniques are, because if you understand these techniques, then you will see how we can apply them towards our service management organization. And that is what I will showcase in the last part of this webinar. So the 4 techniques that you see here on the screen are what I always consider the 4 fundamental techniques of machine learning. And it's always really good to kind of know what these techniques are, so that you can start to see how you can apply that to IT service management. So the first technique is regression. Regression is used to make predictions. So if we were to apply that towards the world of IT service management, with regression, we can start to predict when a particular incident would happen, or we can start to fairly accurately predict which will be the next technology component that will fill. Because based upon patterns, based upon history, we can make these kinds of predictions. So we can use the regression analysis in order to answer these kinds of questions within the context of IT service management. The second key technique that I would highly encourage you to learn a little bit more about is classification. With classification, a computer is able to make a decision to which particular class a new observation belongs. So for instance, if we would like to classify an incident in a particular priority or towards a particular category, we can use a classification algorithm to do that in a smart way. So that means that an incident would always be prioritized in the correct way, or it would be assigned towards the team that is best able to deal with that particular incident. So these classification algorithms can also really make our life easier within the service management domain. The third element has to do with clustering. Clustering is the machine learning techniques that are used to find patterns within data sets. So in the example that you see here in the left bottom corner, you see how data in this case is clustered into three main groups. So here you can start thinking about main groups within your service catalog. So what are services that are fairly common together? What could be bundles or packages of services? Which customers would be interested in a particular group of services? So not just in an individual one. And this is very interesting, both from a commercial point of view, as well as a service delivery point of view. So that is something that you can figure out through clustering algorithms. The last element that we're going to consider, and which is a very fundamental machine learning technique, is outlier detection. With outlier detection, we can see patterns that will not fit within the regular data patterns. So of course, outlier detection is very frequently used within the information security domains or within IT monitoring. So if we are looking at systems and we're measuring whether everything is still up and running within IT operations, through outlier detection, we can detect data points which are unusual or might represent something that we might need to look into. So in the traditional domain of ITSM, this is called alerting, or things that don't fit within a particular pattern. So what I've hopefully gotten across in this slide is that there are these fundamental techniques which are part of artificial intelligence, about which you need to learn a little bit more so that you can leverage these techniques and start to understand how you can apply that towards the service management domain. And this is really the whole point of this webinar. It's all about having the knowledge about these artificial intelligence techniques and then applying them to the very large pools of data that you already have available within your service management systems. And this is truly the objective of this webinar. So let's make this a little bit more practical. On this next slide, I've given some very easy and first steps that any organization can take when they start to embed service intelligence. So if you want to start with service intelligence in your own organization, these are 4 easy elements that you can start with. The first one is prioritization and categorization. With prioritization and categorization, we can use the techniques that we've discussed on the previous slide to automatically assign priorities and categories towards different tickets or records. So this can be done for incidents, it can be done for problems, it can be done for changes. All of these can be automatically classified into the right kind of categories. So that will lead into more efficient dashboarding, more efficient delivery times. A second major domain where you can use service intelligence for is for automated routing, meaning that we redirect the particular problems or incidents towards the right kinds of teams. And by doing so, we can save valuable times, we can improve our SLAs, we can make sure that the people with the right skills are assigned to solving the cases about which they have the most knowledge. The third easy domain is that of SLA performance prediction, because by looking at those classification algorithms that we've seen earlier, we can start to predict whether we're going to meet or exceed our SLAs that we've set for ourselves. So this is really also a very straightforward and easy domain. There's lots of very good case studies and materials available on how to do this. So if you want to set your first steps with service intelligence, SLAs is also something that you can very quickly win some quick wins and successes with. And the last easy domain is that of preventive configuration item maintenance. So using those predictive analytics that we've seen on the previous slide, you can use these kinds of algorithms to kind of detect or predict which components or which configuration items will fail next, so that you can replace them or service them before your customers are going to be confronted with any service outage. So again, this is really easy steps. There's a lot of guidance and best practices around this. So if you're interested in learning more about any of those 4 domains, just send me an email or a message after this webinar, and I'm happy to guide you to the right documentation and guidance and examples on how to do that. Good, so those were some of the more easy domains. Of course, after you started with these first service intelligence kinds of projects, there are more interesting and more fun and exciting fields in which you can apply service intelligence. So for instance, you could use it for proactive service management. As soon as you see that something is wrong, to automatically inform your customers, and to do that through a robot or chat functionality, so that people can immediately interact and see if there's something wrong with their services. We can also use these same techniques to start predicting sentiment. So if we're dealing with customers, to see how happy they are, how their sentiment is changing, what they feel about services, whether they recommend services to others, etc. So that also is very valuable from a commercial point of view, in order to make sure that you get more and more people that are raving fans about your concepts. We could also use techniques to start analyzing tickets to see if there's patterns within those tickets. And on the left-hand side, you see an example of that. So this is where we're assigning values towards keywords within particular tickets, so that we can have a more proactive way of solving, detecting, and dealing with them. And the last element that I wanted to showcase today is more about how to apply deep learning concepts. We haven't really covered that, because that was another subset of machine learning. But with these kinds of technologies, you're able to look at how can we find patterns in pictures? Can we determine whether people are happy or not with our service delivery? So these are further and more advanced topics within service intelligence. So obviously these are way more complex and they require more work and more knowledge. But I just wanted to show you kind of what could be the endpoints, or what could be the end goals that you might achieve through service intelligence techniques. Good. So I would like to spend my last minutes of this webinar not just to learn you about what these techniques are and what service intelligence is, but more or less how you can get started, because that's a question I very frequently get. Well, a lot of organizations want to get involved with service intelligence. They want to start their journey, but they ask me, well, how do I do that? And typically, I always explain it into a 3-step approach. So the first thing that you need to realize is that without structure, there's no control. So in other words, it means that you need to start with getting your service management organization under control. As we've stated before, service management has been around for a very long time, yet I still encounter lots of organizations that have not implemented or executed that well. So after you have that control, so you know which services you're providing, you know which components are making up that service, then you need to start looking at process improvement and automated delivery of those processes. Because if you don't have any form of automation, it's really difficult to start making improvements. Artificial intelligence techniques work together with automation. because they will look at automated processes, the automated generation of data, etc. So only after you've been through that step, then you can get towards service intelligence, because you need to have this automated reasoning. So if you don't have automated reasoning, it's not going to be possible to get towards an intelligent system. So the good news is that for each of those 3 steps, there are frameworks, there are best practices in place that can help you move throughout this cycle and slowly move towards a service intelligent organization. Obviously, in order to get structure, you need to start thinking about service management. Service management frameworks like ITIL have been around for a very long time, and they provide perfect guidance on how to set up this structure within your organization. After that, you need to start looking at how do we deliver services to customers, what are the key components, and how can we make sure that this is done in an automated way. So service automation is the concept in order to deliver those services in an automated fashion. And before you can even start to think about making them intelligent, you first need to have a way to look at them in a form that is automated, so that the system can kind of run by itself. And after you've have that in place, you can move on towards service intelligence, where you're going to embed automated reasoning and intelligence into your service organization. So I typically say that this is a 3-step approach, and this is the way to get started. So depending on where you are within your own journey and within your own organization, I would start focusing on service management, service automation, and then service intelligence. So that's the journey, and it will take some time, and it will require some additional knowledge to learn about all of these techniques. But having been in this field myself for quite a long time, I can really assure you that it's worth it, and you're going to find this very, very interesting if you start studying more about it. So that's kind of concludes where we are today, and what you can do in order to get started with service intelligence itself. So we at Cybiant provide a lot of best practices in order to adopt the service management and services within your organization. And we're really a company that focuses on providing these best practices, lessons, and proven strategies for ITSM and automation. So if you want to learn more about that, I would suggest to get started with either one of our courses, or you can reach out to us to get any more information about any of our service offering that can help your organization also progress towards an intelligent system. So of course, I always need to end with 1 or 2 marketing slides. So that's what I just done. But I think now would be a very good moment to start seeing and answering some of the questions, because I've seen a lot of questions coming in during this call. So let me take a moment to answer them right now. So if you have any additional questions based upon this webinar, please put them into the Q&A or into the chat box right now, and I would be more than happy to look at some of them. Good. Our first question that has come in is from Mohammed. He is asking, our organization does have service catalogs in place. Can we start to apply machine learning algorithms to them right away? Well, yes, you can always start with explaining and implementing machine learning algorithms on any existing data set that you might potentially have. So that's always a possibility. However, I would place it into the bigger picture. I would always try to find a way in which you can start to see, well, what is the journey that we're going to? So are we really going to move towards a service intelligence organization? So what would then be the steps that we would need to have in place in order to do that? So I hope that that answers your question. Our next question is from Paulie. Do you apply security elements into the service intelligence solution concepts? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. I didn't really cover any security measures within this particular webinar, but obviously that's a very important topic. When we're dealing with these kinds of predictions, we always do that based upon data. So we do need to make sure that we have safeguards in place. We need to think about data security. We need to think about data privacy. So that needs to be an integral and crucial part of service intelligence. Because of the scope of this 1 hour session and the scope and the time that we have, I haven't really touched about security, but I've done a webinar on security and the needs to set up a security framework previous week. So if you're interested in that, I really recommend that you look at our YouTube channel to look for the video on how to set up a security framework for these kinds of things. Good. Our next question is from somebody who's anonymous. We have an SLA tool in place to create SLAs. In what aspects can service intelligence be applied? Well, one of the easiest ways in which you can apply service intelligence is for predictive analytics on your SLAs, because based on history and based on the components that you would need in order to meet your SLAs, you can start to predict which SLAs you are likely going to meet this month or a quarter, or which SLAs you are able to breach. So what we mean with predictive service level agreements is that we are using the data from previous versions and the key components that make up your SLA. And based upon that, we can fairly accurately predict whether you are going to be able to meet or breach your SLA, even before the whole month is over. So that's the way that we can use that. So I hope that that answers your question. Good. Our next question is from Dennis. What should come first, fixing data quality issues or going ahead with developing machine learning and fixing data quality issues later? And well, I think that's a very interesting question. And I think I think a lot of organizations struggle with first. Let me start with the basic premise of any kind of data analysis, and that is garbage in is garbage out. So if your data is corrupt or incorrect, then no matter which fancy analysis you run, the result will always be incomplete or inconsistent or just plainly wrong. So that means that data quality is of paramount importance. However, the second element that I need to discuss around that is that don't get over fixated with making sure that your data quality is 100% correct, because it will never be. And most organizations will have tons of data, and within that data, there will always be clutter, there will be corrupt values, etc. That's just part of any kind of data analysis program. So my main answer to your question has two sides. Yes, you need to make sure that your data quality is to an acceptable level, but it doesn't need to be 100% perfect. So it's perfectly fine to start machine learning and predictive analytics on data that's not 100% clean or 100% accurate. So I hope that that answers your question. Good. Our next question is from Cartina. How does service intelligence helps in managing OLAs? Well, basically, it does it in exactly the same way that it will help with service level agreements, because the only difference between OLAs and service levels agreements is who is your customer. So SLAs are more focused externally, whereas OLAs are more focused on different agreements between different departments of the same organizations that you typically need in order to meet your SLAs. So the same techniques that we've talked about earlier on meeting or predicting whether you're going to meet or exceed or breach your service level agreements can be applied to operational level agreements as well. So you can, based on the history and the way that you measure your OLAs, you can nowadays fairly accurately predict whether you're going to meet and exceed the targets that you have set in your OLAs. So my answer to you would be that it's the same techniques and technologies that we would need in order to meet and exceed our SLAs. So I hope that that answers your question as well. So a lot of questions are coming in, which is really nice. I also see a couple that are coming in on the chat. So let me switch to that for a second so that I can answer those as well. The next question is from Stephen. What is the next wave for change management? It's a good question. I think what you're referring to is change management in the context of ITSM, so ITIL change management, because the other option is more on organizational change management. But change management basically looks at the underlying configurations, and it's looking at the underlying configuration items. So what is next for change management is obviously, in my opinion, automated change management. So executing changes and fixes automatically, even without human intervention. So this is part of the topic which is now known as resilience or resiliency in IT operations, in which we automatically fix mistakes. We're executing changes without people actually noticing it, so that our environment keeps up and running before we mix and or we find or detect any kinds of mistakes. So really, in my personal opinion, what's going to be next for change management is automated change management. So I hope that answers your question, Stephen. The next question is from Azlina. Can you explain a bit more on how SLA prediction in service intelligence works? And then she says, okay, it seems you already answered this in the previous question. So yeah, just as a 1 more minute recap, if you look at the way that your SLAs are composed, you see that all of those SLAs are typically the result of a number of KPIs and criteria that you set. So common examples are, of course, our availability, capacity measures, speed to resolution, and I can go on with listing KPIs that are part of SLAs. So in order to meet those KPIs, you have particular ways to do that. There's always a monitoring system in place, because those for instance, capacity or availability is based on the underlying IT components. So what we can do with service intelligence is identify which components are frequently breaching an SLA, or where particular problems are coming from that might jeopardize your SLA in the future. And based upon that, we can make fairly accurate predictions of which SLAs are going to be perfectly fine and will not be breached, or which SLAs might have a probability of being breached at the end of the month. And therefore, you can already start to do proactive maintenance. You can replace probable faulty components. You can add additional capacity if you know that this SLA is within the range of being breached. So that really helps to ensure that you can meet those SLAs. So by predicting which ones you will meet or exceed and which ones you will probably breach, you can still take measures in order to make sure that you reach all of your SLAs. So I hope that answers your question, Azlina. Good, we're almost getting towards the end of the hour. I think most questions have come in right now. I don't think there are any additional ones. Let me quickly look at my screen. No, I don't. I think that those are all the questions so far. So in that case, this is a good moment to start wrapping up our webinar. So we're just within the hour. I would like to thank everybody very much for participating in this webinar. Thanks for participating in the polls. Thank you so much for listening and asking a lot of very good questions. I hope that this webinar was useful and that it has inspired you to know more about what service intelligence is. And hopefully next time that I would open the poll to ask people if they've ever heard about service intelligence, you could now answer this question with a yes. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you back on one of our next upcoming webinars. Thank you so much, and until we see each other again. Bye-bye.